Well, hello there to all the good people of Ohio and beyond. This is Aaron Knapp, and you're tuned into Unplugged, broadcasting without permission. This is a place where the truth gets louder and we dig deeper, and where we always remember be lawful, not awful. If you want the full stories, the documents, the videos, and everything they don't want you to see, head on over to Aaron Knapp unplugged.com, my new home for every investigation, every episode, and every update. And while you're here, be sure to like the video, follow the page, and hit subscribe, and share this with someone who needs the truth. We're building something real here. We're building something fearless, and we're doing it together. Welcome to Unplugged. Let's kick this thing off.
Plug with Nap. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script, no leash, no polish decoys. Broadcasting without permission. We don't ask. We lift the curtain and we drop the mask. Unplug with Nap. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script, no leash, no polish decoys. Broadcasting without permission. We don't ask. We lift the curtain and we drop the mask. Unplug with Nap. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script, no leash, no polish decoys. Broadcasting without permission. We don't ask.
Good afternoon or good morning, I guess. It's 11 a.m. Now, good morning there, Lorraine City, and beyond. Hey, guys, this one here is going to be a little bit more of a personal one, kind of going back over some of the reasons why we're here, where we're at right now when it comes to the city council, the reasons why I'm here, or at least in this current form. And, it really kind of goes down to silence is the cover charge. And that's kind of what the name of this whole game is. It's this whole idea that they keep giving me saying information can't exist, and it does. And there's a moment in every public records fight, in every conversation, stops being about paperwork and starts being about power. And it's in that moment when a government does not merely disagree with you, it doesn't just nearly ask you to narrow a request. It doesn't just tell you it needs time. It's the moment when it tells you in substance, you're not going to get what you're asking for unless you're willing to bleed for it. And then it waits to see if you'll flinch. For the record, I was willing to bleed for it. But then after all the posturing, after all the lectures, after all the claims that the system can't do it or takes too long. I mean, Dave Carter is still trying to dig through emails of the city's system. If it takes you that long, bro, you don't know how to do your job. It should take you 5 minutes to find these emails. But hey, the same government quietly does it anyway. And it doesn't apologize. It never has. It doesn't acknowledge like what it puts you through or me or anybody who's ever asked for anything. It simply just changes the system and pretends like it was always the plan. Oh, we always meant to do this. This was always our plan. And so that's the problem. And that's what this whole segment's going to be about here. It's not a database. It's not a clerical choice. It's not how the records are stored anymore. It's not how it really boils down to this. It's how institutions use inconvenience as a weapon. And then they retroactively erase your role in forcing them to comply. And that's what they've been doing. That's what they were doing to Garen long before I came along. And quite frankly, quite a few of you, because I'm going to just take a little side note here. Narcissistically, when I first looked at all these records cases, I asked the city of Lorraine for every records case that they had open or whatever, litigation records cases, naively thinking I would be the problem. Folks, I'm not the problem. I'm just going to tell you right now, I'm not the problem. Well, I may be now. But back then, when I first started, like, I had very few records requests compared to the people that were asking for massive amounts of data from the city. I'm very specific about what I want. I don't ever just roll in and be like, give me this broad spectrum of records. I'm like, I need this, 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 and this. But hey, that's how I roll, you know. And if you don't know me and maybe you just got here, I haven't explained it enough. My name is Aaron Christopher Knapp. My mom likes that middle name a lot when I'm in trouble. And I am a licensed social worker. I am an investigative journalist. And I am a public records litigator who's learned pretty much the hard way. You cannot negotiate honesty out of dishonest systems. You just can't. You got to be like a Brian Ames. You just got to headhunt until you just document and document and document the lie, force the production, and then make the public understand what you're doing and what happened. That's what this whole episode's about, right? I want to talk to you about one of the clearest examples of that pattern. No, it's not a theory. It's not speculation. It's written right into the record, folks. So it's the day that the mayor, Mayor Jack Bradley, as y'all like to call him, Mayor Jack Bradley, told me that I needed to go through legal counsel. And the day that he told me he wanted to be kept in the loop. It was the day that he reduced a major civil rights demand into one word. And pretty much the day that the city's own law department confirmed that they forwarded my demand to their insurer and opened the claim. And that's the documentary spine of this whole segment, folks. Like, it's going to come down to the quiet part. The part they didn't really want any of us to connect, the part where a few months later, after all the fuss and all those insinuations and all the sensitive database theatrics and all this stuff, when I was arguing for the city's Lorraine police database, they had I was asking Levesque for every document that they had on when Hall was running for office. Levesque was denying me all of the police rules. Basically, I had the city's manual, but I didn't have the police rules. And then candidate Jack Hall and I were talking, and I was like, look, I need the police rules. So he started advising me on what those look like, what they were supposed to do. And to his credit, well, I don't think his agency actually has them online. I think I had to ask for them. But to his credit, he told me how I could find them, where I could find them, where I could go. Gave me all the instructions on what to ask them for. And I did that because it is legal for me to have that. I knew that. But he helped me. He's like, no. And he's not wrong. And it's not like not like he did some secretive thing like Tia would have him do. Side note. Okay, now that I said it out loud, I'm just going to say I posted those comments on the YouTube thing where I want you guys to imagine something. Okay. Imagine a world where, first off, I don't have that kind of money, Tia. I can't buy Jack Hall. You'll have to talk to Buklevich for that. Aaron can't do that. Aaron's poor. Aaron's a disabled veteran. That's why Aaron has that. Aaron doesn't have a job, thanks to James, which we'll address later, and thanks to you, Tia. Because you did call and harass my last employer, and you were the one that filed the CDCA complaint. And I know it because it was down to you or Aaron Bober, and Aaron Bober adamantly denied it, God rest his soul. And it was you, Bober, Aiden, everyone was in there talking in Lorraine Ritchie's little group about me getting hit up there. And you acted like, and you're like, oh, please tell me he got fired or whatever. And so, yeah, you did. You harassed my employer enough to get me fired. Congrats. Now I'm back on my disability pension, which really isn't a lot at this moment. And so that's the problem here, is that that's what they do. And by they, I mean the system. They're going to work together to try and destroy you, to try to take away your livelihood, to try to do anything they can to discredit you. But in the grand scheme of things, I got Levesque, Mr. Joseph Levesque, to send me every one of the police little database I had to ask for them individually. So I got section 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900. It just went on and on and on and on and on. I was like, dude, but that's the way I had to request them because, I, and that's why I'm saying, without an apology that I've made changes that are helping them follow the law, even when they act like I'm this big inconvenience that they have to manage, because they've now put that whole database online. So if you, Joe Schmo citizen, want to go out and get Lorraine Police's complete manual on how their officers are supposed to behave, there's a link. I'm sure Garen will find it and share it, but there's a link online. And that link will take you right there now, and you can look at each one of these individual databases that I have that you can then, whatever you want to do. You want to throw it in an AI and you want to compare it to that. You want to read the whole thing just because you're smart and you want to know what it says. I suggest both. I suggest you take it, you read it, you understand it. Understand what these are because they're the guidelines that Lorraine Police needs to follow. I mean, just like I, as a social worker, had to follow and had to learn. So it was fine. I understood what was going on when I lost my first job with Crossroads because of McCann. And I understand in the end, now that I have the emails that link McCann and Tia together. I mean, that's the one thing. I mean, all you guys, you can say what you want about her. She was emailing James McCann at his city email address, and they were discussing me, a citizen, for no good reason and how to go after me. Whatever. I don't think what you want to think. But that's kind of where we're at. And that's what I'm saying, no matter what I've been doing is getting stuff out there. They put that stuff online now. And it's not a big deal. It's not a crazy deal. It's just normal. It's stuff that should have been normal to begin with. And now it is. Records come a little more freely. People understand the rules a little bit easier. Look no further than the recent city council meeting where they're telling you, there's going to be a new rule that says identifying information is not going to be your address anymore. It could be something like your email address or your phone number, contact info, right? All along, I was telling them I didn't feel comfortable saying my address. Look, my address is all over the internet, all over my cards, all over everything. You guys pretty much all know where I live. That's why Manny Leibs or whatever came to my house and sat outside. But it wasn't the point that you knew my address. It was the point that you didn't have to put it on that form. And I was saying that a year ago. Now, suddenly, you don't have to put it on that form. Okay. Again, another one in the win column, I think. And again, it may be inconvenient at first, but again, they get used to it. And that's the whole thing that I'm trying to point out here is I haven't done anything the wrong way. All I've been doing is the right way. And I want you guys to understand that clearly because this is where I'm at. This is where the mythology about, who Aaron is, who George Patton was, starts to break down a little bit. I didn't begin this process angry, loud, hostile, cursing, this boisterous personality online that I turned myself into after being hammered down by these people in order to get the level of attention that was required to get the message out. I began it the way you're supposed to begin it, the way everybody says I should have done it, right? In a functioning democracy, I asked questions. I asked for records. I raised concerns quietly, directly, and in writing. I have documents for all of it. I followed the procedure even when the procedure was being used against me in the grand scheme of things. And hold on a second. There we go. And sorry. And I didn't take it to social media initially. I didn't initially call a reporter. I didn't stage protests. I just documented it as they do. That's what we social workers do. I wrote emails like Andy Dufresne, and then I preserved the timelines. And I kept copies. I cited the law. I did exactly what a licensed social worker, a mandated reporter, and a citizen of these United States of America is really supposed to do when they see something that's not looking right. I put it on the record, right? They just said it the other day. at the meeting that I broadcast. See something, say something. See something, say something. See something, say something. I did. The issue really, it boils down to access to public records. I didn't improvise or guess. I cited Ohio Revised Code 149.43, I believe Section G typically, by name. I use the language of the statute. I've asked for specific categories. I break it down tight for them. I ask for them in electronic form so that it'll reduce any sort of burden on them. They don't have to, acquire a bunch of extra paperwork. I followed up politely, and deadlines just continued to pass and continued to pass. I didn't threaten them. I didn't posture. I just asked them to comply with their own rules and the Ohio laws. When I actually suspected retaliation, I did not assume it, right? I tested. I asked for explanations. I asked for meetings. I asked for clarification. I reached out to my ward councilman because that was literally his job, Ray Carrion. I reminded him in writing, you represent me. I didn't demand his loyalty. I asked for my representation. That's the one thing these people forget. Whether I vote for you or not, whether you're Republican or Democrat, once you're in that office, you represent me. So when I ask for representation and you don't supply it, why would that make me think you could be a good mayor, Ray? Ray only gives the help to the people that Ray likes. Ray barely speaks to me to this day. I get it. I'm not asking him to hug me, but for Christ's sakes, that man, obviously he hates me. I mean, you saw it in that council meeting. Did you say something? I mean, he just flipped a switch, or maybe I flipped it and he tripped. But I asked him to be my voice when it was being ignored by City Hall, when it was being ignored at the time by Mayor Bradley and by the safety service director at the time, Sanford, Washington. I contacted the law director, Riley. I copied them together. Transparently. So no one could claim that they were being blindsided or misquoted. So I asked for meetings. I waited. Weeks passed. I followed up. Silence continued. I followed up again. The emails, I explicitly say things like, please let me know if you do not wish to represent me so I can seek another avenue. That's not me being belligerent, right? That's patience with Ray. All the while, he's promising meetings with Bradley, with the police, everybody. Then when the chief of police contacted me directly in ways I felt crossed the line, former chief of police, James McCann, I didn't escalate that publicly at first either. I warned the city privately. I said, hey, put him on notice. I said, hey, continued contact from this guy is going to be construed as harassment. I even told James that. I asked them to intervene. I asked him to stop. I didn't go nuclear. I gave everyone an off-ramp. Even with that off-ramp, I told James at the time, I had the email somewhere, this only ends one way, with both of us unemployed and unemployable. So, fine. When the media finally reached out to me, I didn't ambush the city. I disclosed it. I let them know that I told my councilman, Ray, at the time, and others in writing that, I'd been contacted by the Chronicle. I had spoken to Carissa and I think Dave O'Brien. But I did that as a courtesy to let the city know that even though I had no legal obligation to do so, I still wanted them to have one last chance to fix the situation before it became public. I didn't realize at the time that those two reporters were going to completely blow me off, promise to meet with me, never meet with me. At the time, I believe Carissa was in the middle of the fair when the first time we spoke, or vacation or something, said she'd be back, and then that never happened. Same thing with Mr. O'Brien. Neither one of them ever reached out to really follow up on the claims. But so I decided to go to the Ohio Court of Claims over some public records violations. I warned them first on that. I said, hey, I'm preparing to file, because you have to. Legally, you got to let them know they're not preparing the records the way I needed them to be. They're not producing them. I explained why. I gave them time. That matters, because the narrative they want is that I rushed the litigation, right? The truth is that litigation was my last resort, not my first move. There are emails where I say things like, because I've been going back to all my old emails lately, that's where this comes from. You'd be surprised at what you find in your old emails. But there are emails where I'm seeing things like, I'm trying to resolve this without court involvement. Please understand, I would prefer not to escalate this further. There are emails where I explicitly acknowledge that people may be busy, that I'm writing willing to wait a reasonable amount of time. There are emails where I say, hey, I appreciate your response, even when the response was inadequate. It's not the language of a guy that's looking to make and start a fight. The whole timeline that I've done proves this. The emails prove this. The record proves this. Like it's the what actually happened is that my restraint was misread. My professionalism was interpreted as, pliability. My willingness to wait was taken as a signal that they could just keep delaying. Every time I acted reasonably, the system learned that it could push a little bit further without consequence. It started treating me as if I were just affable. Well, that's the quiet truth people need to hear. I did everything right the very first time, right off the bat. Because I met with my supervisor at the time, Michelle, over at Applewood, and she also said that's the best way to go about it. So I did what I was told. Didn't really work out for me, because when they say say something in Lorraine, and you're talking to the chief of police about stuff, he's going to turn it on you, and the mayor's just going to back his play while they violate your civil rights. It's also why I think it's funny that Tia thinks that I'm somehow like that I was a weapon for police. It was never a weapon for Jack Bradley. And you said some pretty crazy stuff about him. We'll get to that in another podcast. But obviously, me and Jack aren't buddies. Me and Jack aren't buddies. Like, none of the Jacks like me anymore. I'll go jack off anyway. That's the quiet truth that y'all need to hear, and is that I was always doing it right from the very beginning. I never skipped any of the steps. I never ignored any processes, because that's not what social workers do. We follow the absolute steps, right? And it's because the people in power had no intention ever of correcting themselves, as long as I remained polite enough to be ignored. So, that brings us to our next section, which is pretty much retaliation is quiet, so to speak, until it's not. Retaliation didn't begin with a uniform, a courtroom, or even any sort of public accusation from anyone. It became the same way that all institutional abuses always start. Little emails that I was never meant to see, phone calls I was never invited to, breakfast meetings between, my former councilman, now the safety service director, and staff about me. My name started traveling ahead of me. It was detached from any sort of context, stripped of any sort of accuracy, and it was repackaged as a problem to be managed rather than a citizen to be answered. When I saw all of that through other emails, from Lorraine Ritchie and other people that I accidentally got in my records request when I was asking for full on, because when you specify certain things, you garner certain names on just like if you're fishing with a net, you're going to grab a few extra things once in a while that you're not looking to get, but sometimes it's not a bad thing to grab. So I saw these ones were, long before I was ever addressing anyone, when I was going as George Patton, Lorraine Ritchie was talking about me and messaging the chief and all these people. There was a consistent drive against my reputation long before I came out as Aaron Knapp. But that first sign was the denial. It wasn't a disagreement, not an explanation. They just, no. I was told records didn't exist. I was told records didn't exist in regards to McCann's emails that I knew existed, because I'd finally gotten little smidgens of them from the county. But what I got after he got let go was exactly what I thought existed, and that's what reset the whole tolling period for them as well. Which is why if they had produced it back, if I had produced it back then, I would have started the lawsuit then. That's what I was waiting for. But I was told policies couldn't be produced, that I knew could, because Jack Hall told me they could be produced, and other police departments had all of that information online. Levesque's literally like, I can't give you that. I can't give you that. I can't give you that. Dude, really? You're the worst lawyer ever. except for maybe the one that was in my divorce, Elizabeth Bird Johns back in Idaho, that didn't turn in closing arguments. Woo, brilliant. I was told timelines were unclear that I was giving them. I was told I was misunderstanding what I was reading. James said that. He's like, "Oh, you misunderstood the email." No, no, dude, I read English at higher than like a third grade level, unlike you apparently. And I'm not misunderstanding what I'm not reading or what I am reading. These were not good faith errors made by civil servants who wanted to protect me or our government or our taxpayers from civil liability. These are statements that are made after I cited specific statutes, referenced known record systems, right? Because Jack told me where to look. Jack Hall. And I pointed to the documents that I already possessed in partial form that the county had given me. And then I had all these denials that were categorical. They weren't cautious. They were designed to shut the conversation down, not clarify it. And they expected me to go away. But when I continued to ask, the story shifted, right? Now, suddenly the records that didn't exist suddenly existed, right? But they were too burdensome to produce. Policies that allegedly were unavailable for months were now suddenly available, but required weeks or months of review to black them out. Entire categories of documents I was asking for were placed under this vague and elastic label: clears, confidential law enforcement investigatory records, their favorite argument, even when the underlying investigations were complete or had never existed in the first place. Clears is always invoked reflexively at all these departments, not surgically as a shield against disclosure. Not surgically, more as a shield against disclosure, rather than what it's supposed to be, which is a very limited exemption applied to very specific records. And this is what matters here, is that not that they're citing clears, it matters how they're doing it. They raise it inconsistently. It's raised after delays have already occurred. It's raised when city later conceded that through their action, or rather than admission, actually, that disclosure was possible all along. Because then suddenly the same policies and procedures that they allegedly required weeks of redaction and review after I got them, they were staggered. I have all the emails from Mr. Levesque. 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, each one with 9 to 10 PDFs in it. After all of that bluster that he gave me about you can't have them, magically he put them all online. Every last one. You can go look them up right now. All the police procedures are online. I mean, really? All right, dude. I get it. You upload it to a searchable online database so the public can use it. That didn't happen because the law changed. It happened because pressure made continued obstruction unsustainable. I want you to understand that. So now you, Joe Schmo, and everyone else in the public have full access to the same rules that Lorain Police has access to that they must follow. So if you, Joe Schmo citizen, want to go out and get that, you can now get that. You can now understand the rules that they must follow, the way they must engage and address you. Now the playing field's equal. I'm not saying go out and commit crimes, because y'all are stupid with that. But I'm saying that the same thing goes with law enforcement. They have rules to follow, policies, like no smoking in police cars. That's actually a crime. But hey, you now have access to that. You're welcome. But during the same time frame, the conversations were happening without me all the time. The chief of police contacted third parties about me, my board, my professional board. They contacted the courts, my employer. Like, he's out there just chatting anyone he could get up. I'm pretty sure he called up my ex-girlfriend and some kid that I, owed lunch money to in the second grade. Others that had no legitimate need to receive any commentary about my conduct or who I was or what I was doing. These contacts were not disclosed to me at the time. In fact, their existence was denied outright when I asked. No such communications, my ass. That statement was false. They lied. And now I have all the emails to prove it. Thank you, new chief of police, Valley, for giving me all those emails. I appreciate you. The significance of those emails is not just their content, it's their timing. They were sent while I was actively engaged in lawful public records requests, They were sent while I was asserting my rights under Ohio law. They were sent when I was asking the city to intervene internally rather than escalate matters externally. And that context matters because it strips away the claim that these communications were routine or incidental. They were neither. When I raised concerns about professional retaliation, I was met with bureaucratic deflection. I was told to be patient. I was told people were busy. I was told issues were under review. No one ever said, this should not have happened. No one ever said, hey, we're investigating this internally. Not one person said, we're going to correct the record. No, that'd be, too easy. What they said instead was nothing that imposed accountability on the person who created the problem. That silence was not neutral. It functioned as an endorsement, tacit approval of McCann's actions. Every unanswered email taught the same lesson, that the city would protect Chief McCann, former chief. The city would also absorb all the legal risk, all the money, and they would slow walk compliance rather than confront misconduct, right? And as long as I continued to operate within their formal channels, that strategy was going to hold. Because retaliation rarely announces itself. It doesn't just show itself out of the blue. It accumulates over time. It thickens in the air around you until you're choking on it, until every routine request becomes a confrontation. Every assertion of your rights is framed as hostility. Oh, he's just hostile. By the time it becomes visible to the outsiders, the public, the groundwork's already been laid. That groundwork is what these emails document. That once you see them, they can't be unseen. Now, I put them all online. I'm not going to drag them out here for you guys to see today. This is a podcast. But if you want to see them, you know where to find them on my pages. So we get to the next act here. We're talking about delay that's not really neutral. It becomes strategic. And one of the most persistent myths in all of this, situation, it's that delay is like benign. It's not. It's not merely the product of workload, staffing, or administrative complexity like they want to talk about. It's not about money. The record here demolishes that excuse. Delay, when repeated, selective, and outcome-driven, becomes a tactic. That's it. It's a tactic. And tactics reveal intent every time. From the beginning, I structured my public records request to minimize burden on them. I narrowed the scope. I asked for electronic production. I broke larger requests into smaller segments. When I was told, a categorical request was overbroad or overly broad, or I adjusted it immediately. When told an index did not exist, I asked how the records were internally organized. That's what the police thing. She's trying to tell me that they didn't exist. The stupidity of that argument with Joseph Levesque about whether or not police had policies they had to follow. That was the most asinine argument I've ever had with another grown adult in my life, knowing that things existed, having seen a section of it that was like section 800. And then he's like, fine, I'll request them one page at a time, dude, whatever I got to do. But that index didn't exist, right? I mean, he literally said these things didn't exist and then later put them online. I asked how the records were organized. When I was told that redactions were required, I acknowledged, hey, reality. I asked for a reasonable timeline. None of that stopped their delays. It just shifted their justification. At various points through this whole process, they're telling me all kinds of crap. I was told that there's no table of contents to the records manual for the police. That was a lie, because later I was told the policies not only existed, but they had to be reviewed individually. Then I was told that the delay would take several weeks. And then several more weeks. And then clears was invoked again. Oh, we have to block stuff out, because even as other departments across the state and the United States really publicly post all the same categories of policies without incident, these explanations did not converge, right? They rotated. Lorraine was just like, no. We can't let Aaron have the rules of the police, because then it'll hold us accountable. And what makes that indefensible is what happened next. Because after all that resistance, after they run around like Borg saying resistance is futile, the city ultimately just put them online quietly. all the policies and procedures into an online database, made them broadly available. The same materials that allegedly pose this extraordinary security risks that they had to send me over months and months and months of denials from the law department and specifically Joseph Levesque. The same materials that allegedly posed this big security risk were now available through an online database. Fuck me. You're welcome. The same materials that required painstaking individual review were now just searchable. The same materials whose disclosure was framed as dangerous now treated, they're just routine. That sequence matters, folks. It proves that compliance was always possible from day one. It proves that Levesque lied and claimed that the burdens were discretionary, not mandatory. Well, it proves that they were discretionary, not mandatory, like they claimed, because they said they were mandatory. And it proves that the delays that we're not talking about protecting the public. They were talking about controlling me and the narrative and getting what they could controlled with me. That same pattern appears in the production of the emails that I asked for with McCann. Like when I requested all emails sent by the chief that contained my name, they were not produced. Not as a single coherent disclosure, right? They were sent individually, fragmented, without context. The choice wasn't accidental, folks. It increased the burden on me. They obscured timelines, made it pattern recognition harder. Only later, once pressure existed, were the communications produced in a consolidated form. Well, I don't even know if it was pressure at this point. Chief Fowling came in and was like, I ain't having any of this. And he sent it to me. Again, the city's own actions undercut their claims. I mean, again, these are emails that didn't exist apparently for 2 years, that they could never send me, that never existed, that were never written, that I was reading wrong, that, even now Captain Morris said didn't exist and then had to apologize to me on the phone, said that Chief told me they didn't exist. So that he's lying to his own officers about it, supposedly. But again, the city's own actions undercut all its claims, because once those emails were released, they contradicted all their prior denials. They confirmed all these third-party contacts that had been flatly denied. I would have never seen those emails if it hadn't been for him sending them from city email addresses, because I'm not allowed to see complaints against my licensure, even fake ones. But they showed commentary about him making comments on my mental state, unhinged, talks about my licensure, my conduct being shared outside appropriate channels. They revealed that the city was not merely responding to me, it was discussing me, it was investigating me. What's crucial to understand is that I didn't force these outcomes through aggression. I forced them through persistence, through documentation, and through the law. Through a refusal to accept indefinite delay as responsible simply because it was wrapped in a professional language. The city did not change course out of any sort of goodwill to me. It changed course because continued obstruction became riskier than complying. That's the problem. That's where the narrative starts to flip. Because once the records are produced, institutions will claim transparency as a virtue, right? Oh, we're very transparent. No, you're not. They point to eventual disclosure, proof of good faith. That framing somehow erases months and months and months of resistance that preceded it. And you see this all across the systems, county, everywhere else, other cities, not just Lorain. This is arguably this kind of global, but I know it's definitively all over Ohio from what I understand. No one's surprised. It treats accountability as generosity rather than an obligation. And it relies on the public not paying attention, right, to the sequence. Sequence is everything, folks. The delay came first. It always does. The denials came first. The retaliation came first. Compliance came only after those strategies failed multiple times. That's not how a healthy government operates. That's how a defensive one does. That's how a sick government operates. One that has a cancer within it. We got rid of one of those cancers. Not sure how many more we're going to have to get rid of before it gets healthy again. But our government needs chemo. But by the time the database went live, of all the Lorraine police codes, damage was already done. They ran my name through the mud. My professionals have been questioned behind closed doors. My requests have been reframed as harassment rather than participation. The city may have improved its practices, but it only did so after treating, you know, lawful accountability as a threat from me. That brings us, back to the beginning of Act One. None of this happens because I skipped steps. It happened because I followed them too well. What I didn't understand though at the time is that every reasonable step I took was being measured, not appreciated. I was doing what they were saying to do, but they didn't really want me to do. Naively, I thought they wanted to be lawful, not awful. So by the time they put that live database up, Levesque put it up, and I think Karen sent to me or something. I was just like, you got to be shitting me. The city wanted the story to be about improvement and modernization and about moving forward, right? Look at what we did. Yay! I saw what you did. You're welcome. Look what I did. Because you wouldn't have done it if I hadn't forced you to. And then everybody was like, well, why don't we just put it online? It would be transparent. Well, they didn't want it to be about, why those changes happened or that I stopped, I wouldn't stop asking questions. So they finally just put it online as they legally should have to begin with. That's the part where people misunderstand when they tell me I should be grateful. Grateful for their eventual compliance. Grateful that things are better now. What they're really asking me to do is forget the cost, the personal cost to me. Forget my lost work. Forget the damage to my reputation. Forget the months of being treated like the only problem for insisting that they follow the fucking law. And I'm not angry. I'm actually happy that the system improved. I'm disappointed that improvement required so much sacrifice on my behalf and others. I'm disappointed that that all this accountability had to be forced instead of embraced by the city. I'm disappointed that the same people who benefited from the change and the changes still refuse to acknowledge how they were achieved. Wear that shoe if you want. It's not about ego, it's about precedent. Because if this is how a disabled veteran, a licensed social worker, and a public records litigator is treated for following the rules, the law, then the message to every one of you should be simple. Silence is safety. Participation is expensive, and it's going to cost you. That's the real cover charge to get into the club, folks. I paid the cover, and the cost was not very abstract. Because up till this point, it would have been easy for you, the listener, to misunderstand the damages as procedural or theoretical. Delays, emails, stress, inconvenience, right? It's not how institutions want these stories to be remembered. Because abstractions do not require accountability. What comes next was not abstract. It was personal. It was professional. And it was deliberate. Because, retaliation is not a fun thing. I am going to take a quick break here, grab another 7-Up, and we will be right back after a word from our sponsors. Here at Unplugged with Aaron Knapp, we like to thank our sponsors. We have a few unofficial sponsors tonight, and they are definitely not paid sponsorships. I want to throw out there a big thank you to Joseph Jones and Eric Jones of the Lorraine Daily and the Vermilion Daily. They have a local news page. You should check them out. They do plenty of great work broadcasting all the news that is the news that you want to have in Lorain and Lorain County. So check them out. Also, please, if you need any legal services, feel free to reach out to Robert Gargas. You can find him listed online. He's a fine attorney and comes highly recommended by yours truly. And last but not least, I want to mention DNC Radio. Please make sure you check out one of the up and coming internet hip hop stations and all of their shows. They put on a lot of shows. You have the Never Outdone show. You also have the Eric Bowen show, Speak Up, Speak Out. So please make sure you guys check them out as well if you're looking for your latest and up-to-date hip-hop artistry. Hey there, folks. Aaron here at Unplugged with Aaron Knapp. I want to give you a quick reminder for everyone watching that the City of Lorain holds its regular City Council meetings on the first and third Monday of every month. And those meetings are not just for council members. They are for residents. If you care about what happens in your city, and if you speak or want to speak on an issue, ask a question, or simply be present and informed, showing up matters. Participation matters. Even sitting in the room and listening matters. You do not need to be an expert on any of this. You do not need permission to care. You do not need to do anything other than just show up. So check the agenda, folks. Mark your calendar. And if something affects your neighborhood, your family, or your future, take a seat, raise your hand, and make your voice part of the record. Lorain City Council, first and third Monday. Your city, your meetings. Those council meetings start at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and they're held inside of City Hall. Make sure you attend. Well, you heard it there, folks. There's a meeting tonight. If you don't have anything going on, or even if you do, 6 o'clock, show up, go to the meeting, check it out. Because I promise you, this is, I believe, the last council meeting of the year. This is when things get slipped through, folks. And I strongly suggest that you all get there and watch tonight. If you don't go to any other meeting, the last meeting of the year should always be the one you go to. I mean, I don't know. They're going to have other commissions and things like that. But when retaliation escalates, it doesn't take the form of a single dramatic act, right? It targets the leverage points. It finds your weak points. For someone like me, that leverage point was obvious. My license, my livelihood, my credibility as a social worker. You know, that's where they went after me. And that's where it stops being about public records and starts being about punishment. How dare you speak out? Or as Eric Bones would say, how dare you speak up, speak out with Eric Bones. I was a licensed social worker and still am in good standing. I'd never been disciplined. I'd never been sanctioned. It was brand new. I graduated OSU in 2022. I know. But I had not been warned. There was no pattern of misconduct, no complaint history that justified the concern. What existed instead was a growing conflict between me and James McCann that did not look like being challenged, documented, or corrected, right? They didn't like it. Well, he didn't like it. That context matters because what followed did not arise organically. It followed confrontation. It followed lawful reporting. It followed public records requests. It followed my refusal to disengage simply because, you know, the city, or more importantly, James McCann, preferred its silence. That first blow landed, you know, through the Ohio Counselor Social Work and Marriage Board. Marriage Family Therapist Board, right? That's my board. A complaint was submitted referencing me and my conduct. The complaint was not disclosed to me at the time, but its existence was initially denied by the city having anything to do with it, right? It was reframed later as confidential, which it kind of was, but only from my board side, not from their side. The responsibility for it was initially displaced entirely, but the effect was immediate. My professional standing was called into question. My employment relationships were destabilized. My reputation was placed under an institutional cloud, and I was removed from being able to act with clients. Now, what's critical here is not merely that a complaint existed, but professionals understand that complaints happen, right? What matters is who initiated it, how it was framed, and why it was triggered when it was. Because it didn't arise after one of my clients complained. It didn't arise from clinical practice. It didn't even arise from a supervisor or supervision or peer review. because I was telling my supervisor everything that I was doing. She was even aware I became a guardian ad litem, and what that held. I sent a letter to her and the courts. That's the whole officer of the court. It arose in the middle of a dispute between me and basically James McCann. I'm not going to say Lorraine Police because my beef was never with LPD. It was always with James. Because, I gave him a few tips and tidbits on things, and he just took them as not well. But, he went after me while I was actively assessing, asserting my statutory rights and documenting misconduct within law enforcement, as well as mainly he was mad that I was addressing his issues with Facebook and the Hildreth handling of that Hildreth incident, and then putting juvenile, court stuff online where I worked. And it's not incidental, it's the through line. Emails later, much later, like later, produced confirmed that McCann was communicating about me beyond the appropriate channels, right? Not simply responding to inquiries from the board, but initiating the commentary. Not simply stating facts, but offering character assessments. I'd say more like character assassinations. Not simply defending departmental actions, but framing me as unstable, problematic, or unfit. And these narratives have carried on into the general community. This is probably why people feel like they're okay to treat me the way they do, right? Even if I am just an outsider, I'm not one of you. I'm unstable, problematic, unfit, right? I do understand now why they were shocked that I was coming down here from Columbus or up. But these communications were sent to, while my records requests were ongoing, while my complaints were unresolved, while the city was telling me there was nothing to see here, right? And at the time, I thought there was no way I'd ever get them. But then I realized he was sending them from his city email address, and that didn't protect them from sending them once the case was closed. And he had admitted it from the beginning, as had my board, because the first thing they asked me was, well, what did you do to make we just want to know what you did to a chief of police to make him so angry that not only did he find out social workers actually had a board, but then he found out how to contact us and then started making complaints against you. And later I find out he's like looking up what social work. I mean, if anything, I'm happy I educated him on what social workers do, because he's looking up what we do. He's trying to find any problem with the way I was doing things, the way I was doing my business. The fact that I pulled over into a parking lot of a massage parlor is being investigated in order to send a text to a client's mom. He wanted to know if I was allowed to do work there. And later basically just stated that it was suspicious because I was there. And that place apparently had money laundering issues or something. We all know what that means, trafficking. But he was doing anything he could to discredit me. And this is all while I'm making complaints about records and First Amendment complaints about the Facebook page being shut down, comments being removed. And the city's just like, nothing to see here. Move along, folks. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, because that matters, because professional boards will rely heavily on the representation of law enforcement and public officials, right? When a police chief invokes his title, his authority travels with the message. Even without explicit instruction, the implication is clear. That guy's a problem. He needs to be looked at. The result was not merely emotional distress, right? It wasn't. It might have, what it might have been was a little bit of
emotional damage.
But it was also about lost income, damaged professional relationships. I could never go back. It was freezing of opportunities. Employers don't wait for outcomes. They react to risk. A pending board matter, even an unfounded one, is enough to sideline someone indefinitely, and it did. I survived that process. The complaint didn't result in any discipline. It was not sanctioned. It was not found to be unethical. In fact, the board did not take any action against my license whatsoever. That outcome matters but it didn't erase the cost. The process itself was the punishment. I mean, still, Applewood terminated me, and they offered me a month's salary as severance if I agreed to sign a non-disclosure agreement. The fact that I'm talking now says I didn't take that. So I spent an entire month off of work, didn't get paid, had to go on unemployment Had to fight all of that, all thanks to James McCann using his badge, his chief of police status, to come after me. Like, all right, bro. After the social work complaint failed to achieve the desired effect, attention shifted to my CDCA license, right? This came much, much later, and in a separate credential and a separate complaint and a separate board and a separate vulnerability. And that one didn't happen by accident either. It didn't happen in a vacuum. Records that I later got showed Chief McCann using his government email once again, communicating with Tia Hilton in a manner that went a little bit beyond passive receipt of information, right? He was encouraging, he instructed, he provided guidance. He said, good luck, because the social work board didn't do anything. He validated her pursuit of the licensure complaints against me, not as a neutral observer, not as a public official attempting to de-escalate conflict, but as someone participating in it, encouraging it. That's where he crossed the line from defensive posture into active retaliation. A police chief does not casually involve himself in the licensure status of a private citizen who has criticized his department. He does not advise third parties on how to pursue professional discipline unless he intends that discipline to occur. Again, I failed to understand how somebody who seems to hate Lorraine's government so much and Tia Hilton manages to be in communication with all these officials. And he doesn't do so, right? He does it on his government email address once again, without really understanding that he's invoking state authority, I guess. His own authority. And again, the timing matters, because these communications also occurred after I had prevailed in an ethics review. After my complaints about the police conduct were substantiated, at least in part, after it became clear that the silencing me through delay and denial was not working. I mean, they shut their Facebook page down, for God's sakes. And at that point, the message changed. If they couldn't stop me from speaking, they would stop me from working. The cost of that strategy was not, borne by the city. It was borne by me. Months of uncertainty, months of explaining myself to employers, months of being treated as a liability rather than a professional, months of defending credentials I had earned lawfully and exercised ethically. There's a cruelty to that kind of retaliation, right? Like, that doesn't show up in official narratives. It's quiet. It's plausibly deniable. It's wrapped in a language of concern for the process, but it's no less destructive for being polite, right? And here's the part that cannot be ignored. None of it stopped my work. Not my real work. It maybe stopped me from employment. It didn't silence me. It enforced me, it enforced, a retraction from me. It did not cause me to abandon public records advocacy. What it did instead was harden me and my understanding of how power actually responds to that kind of accountability, especially here in Lorain. The same city that told me databases could not exist put them online later. The same officials who denied emails later produced them. The same department that claimed neutrality participated in the professional attacks. Each step was reactive. Each step was defensive. Each step came only after pressure was made, any sort of inaction that they had untenable anymore, I guess. And that's I say that without exaggeration, because the improvements that they now benefit from came at my expense. They didn't modernize their systems because they wanted transparency. They didn't refine their practices and follow their own rules because they welcomed that oversight. They did it because I refused to stop documenting the gap between what they said and what they did, or maybe what they didn't do. The failure to do most of what they were supposed to do is the problem. The cost of that refusal is real. It's measurable. It's professional. It's financial. And it was inflicted deliberately upon me, even if it was never admitted out loud. That's the part that the institutions hope you, the people, will not sit with long enough to really understand, right? Because Aaron's just an a-hole. I get it. I'm dislikable. I'm calling shit out. I understand that. Truth hurts. I get it. If you guys are here, that you didn't come here for lies. That's the part the institutions hope you're not going to understand, and they want the ending to be about progress. They're doing better, right? Just like with their most recent little letter when they're like, we care about everyone. But I paid for it, and that's fine. The reason the story matters is not because of what it did to me, it's because what it teaches every one of you who might be watching, that it's the price of participation. Silence becomes rational. Compliance becomes survival. And accountability becomes something only the most stubborn or insulated people can afford. It's not a healthy system, guys. That's a warning sign. That's like, you get gangrene and your fingers start falling off and I'm fine. And that's why the story doesn't end with the database of the police records going live or the emails being released. It ends with a question that the city still can't answer or refuses to answer. Who gets hurt so the system can pretend it fixed itself? Really quick, we're going to head into our next act here, but I do want to remind you once again, folks, tonight, Monday night, we have our city council meeting and Monday's meeting. Hey there, folks. Aaron here at Unplugged with Aaron Knapp. I want to give you a quick reminder for everyone watching that the city of Lorain holds its regular city council meetings on the first and third Monday of every month. And those meetings are not just for council members. They are for residents. If you care about what happens in your city, and if you speak or want to speak on an issue, ask a question, or simply be present and informed, showing up matters. Participation matters. Even sitting in the room and listening matters. You do not need to be an expert on any of this. You do not need permission to care. You do not need to do anything other than just show up. So check the agenda, folks. Mark your calendar. And if something affects your neighborhood, your family, or your future, take a seat, raise your hand, and make your voice part of the record. Lorain City Council, first and third Monday. Your city, your meetings. Those council meetings start at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and they're held inside of City Hall. Make sure you attend this Monday's meeting. Hey there, folks. Aaron here. And by this Monday, I mean tonight. 6 o'clock, folks. Be there or be square. But the cover-up doesn't work without help, folks. And there's a comforting myth that people like to tell themselves when these stories come out to the surface, right? The myth is that, the misconduct is all the work of just this one bad actor, this one bad apple. It's just that one guy. It was just James, one rogue official, one out-of-control department head, one personality. He was the problem, right? That myth's useful because it allows everyone else to remain blameless bystanders. That's not how this works. What allowed the retaliation against me to occur and continue was not just the conduct of the chief, then chief, right? It was the active and passive assistance of others who had the authority, the information, and the obligation to stop it, and they didn't. 2 safety service directors, a mayor, multiple other officials, other law enforcement officers who saw it and understood it. None of them that did anything. Sheriff's deputies, sheriff's departments, judges, everyone that read it had an obligation morally and ethically under their oaths to do something about it, and they all failed. That's what makes everyone so uncomfortable, right? It's not dramatic. It's bureaucratic. It's managerial. It's quiet work of people who understand risk and choose institutional protection over the truth. Start with the mayor. Mayor Jack Bradley was not unaware. He was notified multiple times. He was copied. He acknowledged receipt. At one critical point, I raised civil rights concerns, demanded accountability, and his response was not denial, it was redirection. I was told to go through legal counsel. I was told he wanted to be kept in the loop. I was told, in effect, that the city recognized the seriousness of what I was raising. That acknowledgement does matter. When a mayor is placed on notice of potential civil rights violations, retaliation, and public records abuse, neutrality is not an option. Silence is not passive. Silence becomes a decision, one that you shouldn't have made. And what followed was not intervention, discipline, or correction. What followed was a procedural distance and a disaster by all countings. Because by routing everything through legal counsel, Riley and company, and removing himself, the mayor, from direct engagement, the mayor creates this buffer. And that buffer didn't resolve the problem, it just absorbed it. It allows the city to manage exposure without the underlying conduct going to be changed, right? They get to still act a fool. No public statement correcting the false narratives about me. There was no directive to stop the third-party communications about my licensure. There was no insistence that public records obligations be met promptly. The city's insurer was notified. I had them, notified them. Claim was opened. Risk was assessed, but accountability not imposed. The distinction matters here because when leadership treats a civil rights complaint primarily as a liability issue rather than a governance issue, the goal becomes containment, not correction. Then we get to Safety Service Director Carry-On. Now, Ray is not some peripheral figure on the right or the left. His role placed him directly squarely between the police operations, city administration, and legal oversight. He was copied on communications. He was aware of the escalating conflict. He had the authority to demand explanations, halt improper contact, and require the internal review. He did none of those. Okay? You need to understand he failed in a couple of different roles. First, he was my councilman, and he agreed to represent me and get me these meetings that, again, where's that meeting at, Ray? Just got to be patient, right? Don't go down that road. Here we are, a year and a half later, 2 years later, whatever it's been, still no meeting. So he basically blew smoke up my ass for, several months before he retired or did whatever it was he did. And then suddenly he's the safety service director. And instead of being my representative, he's the one doing the investigation. Okay. The one that was supposed to be into McCann, but was titled the Knapp investigation. Okay. So he allows the situation to remain undefined. There's no clear acknowledgement of misconduct. There's no written directive to stop the retaliatory behavior, right? No corrective memos, no boundaries set. Ambiguity just became the whole operating environment. I know that Ray did tell me at one point he told McCann not to message me again, and then McCann did. Still, I finally had to block him. That ambiguity benefited only one party. And when the chief of police contacted third parties about me, my boards, other people, the courts, there was no public, repudiation. When records were denied and later produced like magic, there was no internal reckoning. When clears exemptions were raised inconsistently and then abandoned in practice, there was no explanation. In systems like this, inaction is not oversight, it's permission. And then there's the law department. Oh, boy. So Joseph Levesque, his role was not to advocate for the chief. It was to advise the city on compliance with the law. And this is where the record becomes especially instructive because it shows how legal language can be used to not clarify obligations, but to blur them. And that's exactly what Mr. Joe did. Joseph, over and over and over and over again, tells me records did not exist. Then they existed, but they weren't indexed. That was with the whole security or the policy procedure manual. And then they required weeks and weeks of review. Oh, and then clears applied. Oh, and then the law department was not the repository of the records. That I should contact someone else. And then no further information would be forthcoming. These were not consistent positions. They were rotational defenses. Like he would just, which one's up? It's like he spun a wheel. The wheel of denials. At one point, there was one that just says, go yourself. Never got that one, unfortunately. At no point did the law department definitively state under penalty of record retention law that certain records did not exist, right? What they did, at no point did they identify a specific custodian and ensure compliance. At no point did it acknowledge contradictions between earlier denials and then the later productions that they just randomly gave to me. More importantly, when emails were ultimately produced that contradicted prior statements, they don't exist. There was no correction, no clarifications, no apologies, The production was treated as closure rather than exposure, right? That's not legal advocacy. That's institutional shielding. And that's straight fucked. Like, they were like, hey, so, we were looking, and now that Chief's gone, we kind of found this stuff over here, these records. And we were looking at them, and surprise! Like, what am I supposed to do with that? You guys destroyed my career for 2 years over these emails that supposedly he didn't send, and he sent, and all of you lied about it. And in the case of Mr. Levesque, he's straight covered. If you didn't know, you should have known. You were offering bad advice to the city because you should have told McCann that under the law he would have had to turn him over. But hey, rather than acknowledge that communications about my professional status were occurring outside appropriate channels, what did the city do? They disclaimed all knowledge. The responsibility was displaced, and the existence of the communications were denied until they can no longer be denied. That's how cover-ups actually function, folks. Not through forged documents or dramatic lies, but through fragmentation, by forcing the requester to chase their tail, chasing answers across multiple departments, declining to connect the dots that are so friggin' obvious when viewed as a whole, right? Like, just connect the dots in a circle and somehow you're missing one little piece and you're looking at it from above like, oh, well, just... So by exhausting the person, asking the questions until they either give up or become framed as unreasonable. I wasn't giving up, so what do you think they did? And what unites all three figures is not conspiracy, it's not alignment, is that each acted in a way that reduced risk to the institution, the city, rather than addressing harm to the individual, me, the constituent. Each one of them benefited from the same strategy: delay, deflection, and procedural distancing. Each failed the same test. Bradley, Carrion, Levesque, none of them asked the most simplest of all the questions that should have been asked early on. Is what is happening here to Aaron right? Is it okay what James is doing? Do we know that this is how he acts? Is this his MO? Yeah. And Aaron's got him dead to rights? Yeah. Should we maybe say something and save the city some money? Yeah, but it's James. He's going to come out on top. They never asked us what's happening here, right? They didn't care. Instead, the questions were logistical. Who has the records? How long does it take? What exemptions might apply? Who should respond? How do we route this? How do we, reroute this? The mindset stops being, does not stop being retaliation. It enables it. By the time the city's practices have changed, by the time the databases were live with the 100 series to 800 series on the police records, and those emails were produced, the damage was done. And the people who have sustained the damage did not need to send emails attacking me or file complaints themselves. Their contribution was subtler and more powerful. They just made sure nothing stopped it. That's why this act matters, because if accountability stops at the most visible actor, the system learns the wrong lesson, right? It gets taught that misconduct is survivable as long as enough people look away. And that didn't happen in spite of the city leadership. It happened through it. Understanding that is the only way to prevent the next person from being quietly sacrificed to protect the appearance of order. That the chilling effect on this, it is the point. By the time you stop and take a step back and look at all of this together, the pattern stops being debatable. What happens to me cannot be understood as a series of isolated disputes, misunderstandings, personality conflicts. It makes sense that when you see it as like one single continuum line, one that kind of begins with lawful participation and ends with a deliberate effort to make that participation feel dangerous, exhausting, and personally costly. And it is. That's where the chilling begins to affect lives. Not in any one email, one denial, one interaction, but in the cumulative weight of all of them. I'm a disabled vet, whether they like to admit that or not. That's not some rhetorical flourish. It's not a shield I deploy for sympathy. It's just a fact. It's legal, it's factual reality that shapes how I interact with government spaces, how stress affects me, and how retaliation compounds harm. The city was well aware of this. I didn't hide it. I gave them the paperwork. It was disclosed. It was documented. Once it was disclosed, it should have triggered care, accommodation, and restraint. Instead, it became another variable to manage. I mean, they started to use it to apply it against me. The acts you've already heard about did not stay confined to records requests and email chains. It followed me into physical spaces. They followed me into public meetings. They followed me into civic participation itself. When I spoke at council meetings, I did so within the rules. I followed time limits. I stay on topic. I addressed the body respectfully. I raised concerns about transparency, access, compliance with law. None of it was disruptive. None of that was novel. That's exactly what public comments for. Yet the reaction I receive is not engagement, it's suspicion. My presence was treated as a problem to be anticipated rather than a constituent exercising a right, right? Side conversations happen, eyes rolled. Oh God, here he comes again, right? And then side conversations, the tone shifts. The rules that applied before had applied loosely to others suddenly hardened when it applied to me. The same behavior that passed unnoticed when coming from featured and favored voices became concerning when it came from mine. That's how chilling works. You're not told to stop speaking. You're made to feel watched and uncomfortable when you do. For a disabled person, especially a disabled veteran, that environment's not neutral. It heightens my anxiety. It increases my physiological stress. It turns routine participation into calculated risk. I go in there every time wondering if they're going to try to arrest me. And when government officials knowingly create or tolerate that environment by yelling at me after I've asked them not to, they're not merely being discourteous, they're weaponizing access and they're weaponizing my disability against me. That weaponization became even more apparent when I decided to run for office. Running for office is one of the most protected forms of political participation in democracy. It is literally the ultimate act of saying, I do not just want to complain about the system. I'm willing to submit myself openly, transparently, and under scrutiny for someone who has already been targeted. That choice is definitely not easy. It requires courage, stability, and a belief that the rules will at least be applied evenly. I feel like I was wrong there. What I really encountered was more escalation. My candidacy did not trigger debate about policies or ideas. It triggered renewed interest in undermining my credibility. Old narratives came back up. Mischaracterizations were recycled. People who had remained silent suddenly had opinions again. And behind the scenes, the same pattern repeated. Conversations about me, not with me. Decisions affecting me, not explained to me. And in the grand scheme of things, this is not a coincidence. When someone who has been challenging the system decides to seek office, the stakes change. Criticism becomes a threat, participation becomes competition. And the incentive to that discredit, discourage, or exhaust that person intensifies. For a disabled vet, that escalation carries additional consequences for me. Stress is not abstract. It affects my health. It affects function. It affects daily life. So when these officials knowingly contribute to that stress through this targeted scrutiny and selective enforcement, they're not just chilling my speech, they're inflicting harm on me. And that ties up all the prior acts together. It's not malice in the abstract, it's deterrence. The delays were not just delays, they're teaching a lesson, right? If you ask too many questions, your life becomes complicated. Why can't, like Tucker said, if I just acted normal, if I just, you know, asked only the right questions, basically, if I was friendly and nice to everybody, because everybody hung out together back in the day at Lakewood Park and you guys all know each other. I'm just some outsider. So I get it. Don't ask questions. Don't make noise. Don't participate. Just shh. Let it happen. The denials were not just denials, folks. They signal resistance. If you push, the system's going to push you back. The retaliation was not just retaliation. It was served as a warning. Professional consequences are on the table. The cover-up was not just self-protection. It preserved the structure that allows all of this to happen again. And the reaction to my public participation, both at meetings and at the ballot, reveals the end goal. Not to defeat me in argument, but to make the cost of participation so high that others will think twice. That's the chilling effect. And it doesn't silence one person. It disciplines the whole room. Every resident watching now how I was treated learns something. They learn what happens when you persist. They learn what happens when you document. They learn what happens when you do not accept vague answers. They learned that even if you follow every rule, the system can still decide that you're the problem. And for disabled veterans and others who already navigate barriers to participation, that lesson lands harder. Even its presence really says your presence is conditional. We don't really need you here. Your rights are fragile. Your compliance will not protect you guys. And that's why this whole sequence matters. That's why Act 1 still stands untouched. I did everything right the first time. Followed the process, respected the authority, gave the warning, sought the resolution, stayed inside the system longer than most ever would. What I didn't understand at the beginning and what I kind of understand now with painful clarity is that in some systems, doing the right thing or doing everything the right way doesn't really earn you protection. It earns you more scrutiny. It marks you as someone who knows the rules well enough to be dangerous. The chilling effect it's not an accident. It's an outcome. And the most important thing for people listening to understand is this: the system does not fail because you or I participate. It fails because it reacts to participation as a threat rather than a responsibility. Like white blood cells attacking a virus. And that's not a personal grievance, right? That's just a civic warning. Naming the moment, when we look at the moment that the mask slipped off all of this, there's a point in every record, like where intent stops being inferred, starts being stated. For me, that point came when I saw that the email where the chief is quoted as saying, "I'm the reason the LPD doesn't work with social workers anymore." He wrote an email to someone that said that. I think it was Tia Hilton. I am literally the reason the entire Lorain Police Department apparently doesn't work with social workers. Just me. All right, we're coming here close to the end, guys. I'm going to do a one last quick ad, and then we're going to finish up. So please bear with me, and I will be shortly right back. Back shortly. Hey there, folks. If you really want to know what's happening in your hometown, the place to go is Lorain Daily and Vermilion Daily. From city council and school boards to local businesses, community events, and neighborhood stories, these outlets cover what the big media ignores. This is hyper-local news for real people in real communities. Visit Lorain Daily and VermilionDaily.com today. Read it, share it, support local journalism, because your community deserves coverage that actually lives here. Ugh. All right, guys, we're going to finish up here. The sentence matters kind of more than anything else because in the story, because it collapses every remaining pretense that it was about some sort of, a disagreement, right? It wasn't about my tone. It wasn't about a workload, a misunderstanding, an administrative friction. It was an admission that a personal response to my conduct was projected outward and weaponized against an entire profession. And that conduct, it bears repeating because lawful advocacy, documentation, and compliance with my ethical duties as a social worker. And what that really says, when I read that line, what struck me is not just the hostility, but the scope of it. I was no longer being framed as an individual who had raised concerns. I was being cast as a contaminant, right? A justification, an excuse. By him saying that I'm the reason law enforcement no longer works with social workers, the chief was doing several things all at once. He was blaming me for the institutional withdrawal. He was signaling to others that association with me was dangerous. And he was implicitly reframing collaboration with social workers as optional, conditional, and disposable when accountability becomes uncomfortable. That's not a throwaway remark, folks. That's a worldview. And it transforms a personal grievance into a policy posture. It turns retaliation against one licensed professional into collateral damage for an entire field. And it does so without evidence, process, or any form of accountability. And that's the absurdity and the danger of this claim. I'm just one social worker. I do not set interagency policy. I don't control memoranda of understanding. I don't dictate whether a police department engages in multidisciplinary responses, suggesting that a single individual exercising statutory and ethical rights somehow dismantled the entire cooperation between institutions. It's not just false, it's absolutely fucking absurd. I Statements like that function as cover, folks. They don't justify disengage. They justify the disengagement. They normalize the regression. They allow law enforcement to retreat from best practice and blame the retreat on the very professionals whose presence exists to reduce harm, de-escalate crisis, and protect vulnerable people. And they send a clear internal message: accountability has consequences, not for the institution, but for anyone who insists on speaking up. And that's how it fits in the larger pattern. This quote didn't appear in a vacuum. It aligns perfectly with everything that I've documented, right? Like, I've asked questions, I've labeled as difficult. I requested records, I was treated as a threat. I followed the law, and I was framed as unstable. I've documented concerns and was portrayed as disruptive. At every stage, the response escalated from substance towards character, away from substance and more towards my character. By the time the email was written, the escalation had matured into something more dangerous. It was no longer about me alone. It was about rewriting the narrative so that the problem was not misconduct or delay. The problem was the person who refused to stop noticing it. Like, maybe if you don't look at it, it'll just go away. That's how retaliation evolves, folks. It starts quietly, it ends expensively. And the chilling effect is the point. That when the chief of police attributes the breakdown of a social work collaboration to one guy, the real audience isn't me, it's anyone watching. It tells other social workers that speaking up risks professional isolation. It tells administrators that silence is safer than integrity. It tells advocates that persistence will be punished, not engaged. And for me, as a disabled vet and a licensed social worker, it sent a personal message. My background, my training, my ethics, and my service do not shield me. They may be more dangerous to a system that prefers unchallenged authority. And it can't be minimized. It's not rhetoric. It's not tone policing. It's not even a misunderstanding. It's senior law enforcement official or officials explicitly assigning blame to a single social worker for institutional disengagement while the same social worker was actively exercising protected rights and professional duties. That's it. And the retaliatory logic started and was stated out loud. Once it was stated out loud, it cannot be walked back by claims of miscommunication or good faith. It becomes part of the record, part of the pattern, part of the reason this story matters beyond me. Because if this is how the system responds to one person who refused to be quiet, the real question is not why I was targeted. The real question is how many others learned the lesson they were supposed to learn from watching it happen. Duty becomes defiance in the eyes of power. And I'll say it plainly because anything less really allows the misconduct to hide behind tone and personality. What happened to me was unacceptable, unconstitutional, not rhetorically unconstitutional, not theoretically unconstitutional, constitutionally fucking unconstitutional in the most basic black letter sense of the word. Clear? Constitutionally unconstitutional. I did what I was trained to do. I did what I was legally obligated and bound to do. I did what veterans are told to do, what social workers are told to do, what citizens in democracy are told to do. I saw something that didn't look right, and I said something. Through lawful channels and writing, documentation, patience, and restraint. For that, I got retaliated against. But duty's not optional when you wear these roles. As a veteran, I was trained that silence in the face of wrongdoing is not neutrality, it's complicity. The oath doesn't end when the uniform comes off. It becomes quieter, more personal, a little more inconvenient, but it doesn't disappear. And then as a social worker, the duty is even more clear. or even clearer, I should say, that the NASW Code of Ethics does not treat reporting concerns as a preference. It treats them as an obligation. Mandatory reporting is not limited to abuse in the household. It extends to systems that harm people, to institution practices that create risk, and the misconduct that's normalized through silence. When we see that, we are not allowed to look away because it might upset someone with power. As a citizen, the Constitution protects exactly this behavior. The First Amendment does not exist to protect comfortable speech. It exists to protect inconvenient speech, critical speech, and speech that those in authority would definitely not want to hear. The right to petition the government for redress of grievances is not a decorative language, folks. It is the core structural protection. It's there. That's why it exists. I exercise that right repeatedly, carefully, and lawfully. But retaliation will never be a policy choice. It's always going to be a constitutional violation. What followed wasn't a disagreement because governments are allowed to disagree. What followed was not delay for legitimate administrative reasons because governments sometimes need time. What followed was not even negligence. What followed was retaliation. When my lawful requests were reframed, right, as harassment, and that was retaliation. When my professional concerns were mischaracterized as instability, that was retaliation. When my name was circulated to third parties in positions over my employment, my licensure, that was retaliation. My disability was implicitly used to question my credibility. That was retaliation. Under, the Constitution, the government may not punish a person for engaging in protected speech or petitioning activity. That principle is not novel. It's settled case law. It applies whether punishment is overt or subtle, whether it comes from termination, blacklisting, licensure interference, or even reputational sabotage. You don't need an arrest to violate the First Amendment. You only need adverse action to be taken because someone spoke. That's exactly what happened here. I saw something, I said something, and it was a lie, at least when I did it. That's what sits wrong with me. We're told thousands of times over and over, speak up, speak out. You're told to report your concerns internally, told to trust the process. We're told retaliation will not be tolerated. It's all over their forms. We're told that transparency is valued and accountability is essential. And I believed that shit. I acted on that belief. I did what they told me to do. But what I really learned is that those slogans are conditional. They apply only when the reporting doesn't threaten power, reputation, or control. When it does, the same institutions that preach accountability turn inward and protect themselves. The message I got wasn't very subtle, and it was enforced through action, not words. The message was that seeing something and saying something is not only, it really is only acceptable when it's convenient for those people who are kind of being observed, right? That inversion is dangerous. It teaches the exact opposite of what constitutional systems require. And it stops being justice. It's not just personal, it becomes structural. It'd be easier for me to just frame this as they hated Aaron because that's what they want. Personal conflicts can be dismissed. Structural failures cannot. What happened to me sent a signal outward to the rest. It told other social workers, other helping professionals, and other people that collaboration has limits. It told other veterans that service doesn't shield you. It told citizens that persistence will be punished if it becomes too effective. It told anyone watching that the cost of participation might be your livelihood. That's the chilling effect of the Constitution forbids, folks. Supreme Court said it, long recognized that retaliation against the one speaker harms many. You do not need to silence everyone if you make an example of one. Chop his head off and put it on a pike and you should be good. Put him up on the cross and you should be good. The fear does the rest of the work for you. And that's why I'm not wrong for refusing to be quiet about this. I'm not being reckless for continuing to speak or arrogant for continuing to document. And I'm not hostile for continuing to insist on compliance with the law, doing what the system claims it wants us to do. That behavior is treated as a threat, then the problem isn't me. The problem is a government that has confused authority with immunity and compliance with loyalty. And my duty did not change because the response was hostile. If anything, it became more clear. it became clearer. Silence would not have restored my career. Silence wasn't going to somehow, protect anybody else. Silence would have only validated their behaviors, and I wasn't about to do that shit. That's why the story matters. That's why it's not about vindication, right? It's about clarity. I love that because that's my daughter's name. When a government retaliates against a veteran, a social worker, a citizen for doing exactly what they're trained and instructed to do, it exposes a fault line that affects everyone. It affects how fragile rights become, or it reveals how fragile they become when exercised by someone who refuses to back down. I did not break the system by speaking. I revealed where it was already broken. And that's just not just my right, it's my duty. Along the way, I uncovered more than I expected. That's another piece of the story that matters because along the way, it kind of explains why the response to me became so disproportionate, so aggressive, and so personal. I continued doing exactly what I was trained to do, reading records carefully, cross-checking timelines, comparing statements to documents. I began uncovering all kinds of misconduct that I had nothing to do with my original complaint. I wasn't looking for it. I didn't go hunting for a scandal. It just surfaced because the records forced it to surface. It's like a fishing net grabbing stuff. I would be remiss if I didn't bring this up. One of those discoveries that I now know is the whole thing about Mihawk. Through public records, court documents, and patterns of conduct that became impossible to ignore, I identified serious concerns involving his judicial behavior that raised ethical and disciplinary red flags. This guy was off the rails. Not speculative, not gossip, documented concerns grounded in public record that I got from the courts. Concerns that any ethical professional, especially when bound by duty, cannot ethically ignore once they see him. So at that point, I'm faced again with a choice I had already made repeatedly. And that was to look away and protect myself or report what I uncovered through the proper channel. Yeah, you're right. I went and hid and I didn't report it. Of course I fucking reported it. I submitted a complaint to the Ohio disciplinary authorities. I did so carefully. I did so factually. I did so without theatrics. I relied on the documentation, not my opinion. I did not leak it for attention. I did not weaponize it for leverage. I followed the exact process the state has created for handling judicial misconduct, and I reported it. That matters because it expands the context of what happened to me. I'm no longer just a citizen asking uncomfortable questions of the police department. I had become someone who had demonstrated repeatedly that it would follow the evidence wherever it led, and when it implicated powerful actors in different branches of the government, I didn't give a shit, right? Doesn't matter what your name is. It matters what you did. Because at the end, right, when we're all on Judgment Day, I don't think it matters whether you're a king or a peasant, right? You still got to give the coin. But that changes how the institutions will perceive you because accountability is contagious to those who fear it. Once you start to demonstrate that you're actually willing to document misconduct, report it, stand by it publicly, once you realize you're willing to be the problem to manage and become a threat to contain, not because you're wrong, but because you're right and you're consistent. I did not selectively apply ethics, right? I did not decide that, well, one kind of misconduct mattered a little bit more than the other. I can ignore that, but not that. I didn't say, oh, this one's too big or this case could cause trouble. I applied the same standard everywhere. If it was documented, if it was unethical, if it implicated harm or abuse of authority, I acted. Period. That consistency is what made me dangerous to them and the whole problem. It explains the dogpile, the effort to paint me as unstable, the eagerness to question my licensure, both of them, the willingness to circulate commentary about my mental state rather than address the substance of what I was reporting. When institutions feel exposed, they rarely argue the facts, right? They attack the credibility of the person holding that mirror. My Mihawk reporting didn't just cause retaliation, it confirmed it. It showed that the hostility I was facing was not isolated and accidental, it was systematic. It crossed departments, it crossed roles, crossed loyalties. Reporting misconduct is not provocation, it's a civic duty and function. And there's a dangerous narrative that gets deployed when people like me refuse to stop. The idea that we're agitators, that we're obsessed, that we're unable to let things go. The narrative collapses, though, when you understand what actually happened. I didn't escalate because I was angry. I escalated because the record kept escalating. Each time I followed the law, it revealed another failure. Each time I reported through proper channels, it exposed how rarely those channels are respected when powerful subjects are the subject of the investigation. The irony is that if I had stopped at any point and ignored Mihawk issue, if I'd stayed in my lane, as they say, if I'd chosen personal safety over professional duty, many of the people attacking me now would be telling the public that transparency works. Transparency only works when someone is willing to endure the consequences of enforcing it. That's it. That's why it matters to the rest, the whole story. Because it's not just a side chapter, it's a reinforcing one. It shows my actions were not selective, personal. They were principled. They were not vindictive. They were consistent. They were exactly what the rules of ethics and military values and constitutional design demand of someone who sees wrongdoing and refuses to normalize it. It also explains why the retaliation intensified rather than subsided. Because I did not learn the lesson they wanted me to, right? I didn't retreat. I didn't get quiet. I didn't internalize the warning. I just kept doing what I do. And that's why the story is not just about me. It's about what happens when one person takes civic duty seriously in a system that quietly depends on most people not doing that. Where participation becomes the offense. Because by the time all this becomes visible, it's impossible to pretend that, these are isolated reactions to isolated events. Somehow, like what happened to me was not about tone, personality, or persistence. It was about participation that worked. Participation that produced records, participation that exposed contradictions, participation that forced institutions to move when they preferred stillness. Now, everything I did follow the same logic. I asked questions, I requested records, I reported misconduct through formal channels, spoke at public meetings, ran for office, documented what I found, published it. Each of these actions is explicitly protected. None of them are radical. They're not crazy. It's all First Amendment protected stuff. All of them are foundational to the functioning of our democracy, folks. And yet every one of them was been and has been met with resistance that escalated as participation became more effective. That's the through line. Pattern's not disorder. It's actually the escalation in response that's to effectiveness. When I file public records requests, when you do it, when others do it, the response was delay and denial. When I persisted, the response became character attacks and insinuations. When I documented the retaliation, the response shifted to professional destruction. When I continued participating publicly, the response turned to social isolation. You're not going to have friends. Like Tucker said, everybody knows everyone, so you're cast out. You're an outcast. If you'd have been nicer, we might have been friendly with you. I get it. I'm sorry. You're not going to let me be your friend, Tucker? Response. When I continue participating publicly, the response has turned into this social isolation, meeting hostility, and attempts to delegitimize my presence altogether. None of this has happened because I broke rules. It happened because I exposed how selectively they are being enforced and ignored. The Mihawk reporting sits squarely at that pattern. I didn't stumble into it recklessly. I uncovered it because I was already inside the record. Once I saw it, I did what every ethics code I've ever lived under requires. I reported it to the appropriate disciplinary authority. I documented it and I reported it publicly. That action crossed an invisible line for them, not because it was unlawful, but because it demonstrated something institutions fear. They fear it more than outrage. They fear consistency, courage to do the right thing. In the grand scheme of things, I apply the same standard everywhere: police conduct, public records compliance, judicial ethics, professional licensure abuse. I will not pick sides. I just follow the evidence. Democrat, Republican, whatever, powerful to low level. That consistency is what's unified the response against me. The licensing's attacked are not separate, they're strategic. When McCann went after to target my social worker license, it wasn't incidental, it was calculated. He understood that exactly what that license represented. It's not just my employment, it's my identity, my credibility, and my ability to participate in the civic systems as a professional voice, just like his badge was to him. When that attack failed, he didn't stop. He just shifted it. Later, using his government email, he instructed and encouraged Tia Hilton to pursue my other credential. That matters, not just legally, but structurally, because it shows intent. It shows coordination. It shows that one avenue was silenced. Once that was gone, another one was pursued. It's not about protecting the public. It was about punishing me for using my professional training the way it was intended to be used. Social workers are taught to document, to advocate, to escalate when harm is ignored. We're taught to report misconduct even when it's uncomfortable. Veterans are taught the same thing under a different name. See something, say something. Do not abandon your post because authority is inconvenient. Leave no man behind. It's about the brother next to you. I did exactly that. And for doing exactly that, I was treated as the problem. And public meetings have only become more hostile. The more effective I become, my presence, as I become effective, my presence is only tolerated. Once my documentation became circulating, once the records request turned into compliance changes, once reporting produced consequences, my participation at meetings is reframed as disruptive. Nothing about my conduct changed. The reaction to it did. My disability became a factor, not because it interfered with my participation, but because it could be weaponized to explain away hostility towards me instead of accommodating participation. The system treated my presence as inconvenience to be managed. It's not accidental, folks. It's the same logic that animated every response. Participation is acceptable until it forces accountability. Then it has to be pathologized. Then it becomes the infection. I wasn't supposed to run for office because when I did that, the reaction was immediate and revealing. It was not disagreement over policy. It was not debate. It was disbelief that I would dare formalize my participation. How dare you? Candidacy is participation made undeniable. It's the ultimate expression of civic engagement, and it was treated as further evidence that I needed to be stopped. By that point, the pattern was complete. Records requests, reporting, licensure attacks, meeting hostility, candidacy backlash. It's all there. Each response escalated as my participation moved closer to power. It's not coincidence, it's design. The chilling effect is the point, not the side effect. And everything converged right here. That's what happened was meant to send me a message, not just to me, but to anyone watching, anyone willing to speak up or speak out. Do not persist. Do not document too carefully. You better not escalate properly. Do not follow the law too well. Do not run for office after challenging authority. Do not be a disabled veteran who refuses to be quiet. Do not be a social worker who takes ethics literally and seriously. Because if you do any of those things, the system will not meet you on the merits. It will exhaust you. It'll hurt you. The chilling effect is not accidental. It's the outcome. And that's why the story matters beyond me, because participation that actually works is the kind of participation systems try to punish folks. And I'm not going to accept that narrative. They want this to be a conflict, stubbornness, and an obsession. It's none of those things. It's duty. I participate exactly as instructed by law, ethics, and civic expectation. And when that participation exposes failure, the response will not reform. It's just retaliation. I didn't break trust. I tested it. The fact my actions ultimately force compliance, policy change, disclosure, public accountability only confirms the truth that they're trying to bury. Didn't happen because I did too much. It happened because I did it right. And that's why we're still here and why I'm still here, still documenting, still speaking, still participating, because the Constitution doesn't require permission. It requires courage. And that's why everyone else, who is still deciding to speak, there's this temptation explicitly when a story becomes too dense to treat it as exceptional. To tell oneself this is about just one person, one conflict, one unusually messy set of facts. That temptation is comforting. It allows institutions, observers, and the alike to avoid the harder conclusion. The harder conclusion is that what happened to me is not rare. It's simply visible. Once you step back and you look at the full arc, the real damage becomes clear. The most serious harm here is not what it did to me, though that cost was real and lasting, right, to me. The most serious harm is when it teaches everyone else who's paying attention, including my own child. It teaches them what happens when participation actually works. It teaches them the lesson that, how, the lesson that the system teaches, though, is when it retaliates successfully. Every time a resident watches a public records requester be slow walked, dismissed, or reframed as a nuisance, they learn a new thing. Every time a professional sees a license threat after reporting misconduct, they learn something new. Every time a disabled vet is treated disruptive for insisting on access and accountability, they learn something new. They learn that the rules are conditional for them. They learn that participation is only safe if it remains ineffective. And I know this because people told me quietly in messages, conversations off the record, social workers who said they could not afford to lose their license or their jobs, city employees who said they agreed with me but had families, residents who said they stopped speaking out to meetings because they just saw what happened when I didn't stop. That's the chilling effect, folks. That's not abstract, it's behavioral. It changes what people do. My case matters to disabled participants specifically because disabled residents, this message is sharper and more dangerous because the message is accommodation ends where inconvenience begins, and that asserting access can be reframed as disruption. That's where the visible distance can be turned into a rationale for exclusion rather than inclusion, right? That's the problem. I experienced it not because my disability made participation impossible, but because it made it easier to question my legitimacy once participation became uncomfortable for those in power. And the moment access stopped being symbolic and became consequential, tolerance vanished. That's a civil rights failure, not a personality clash. Disabled participation is not a courtesy, it's a right. And when asserting the rights that lead to retaliation, it sends a signal far beyond one meeting, one individual. It sends disabled residents that they will not be tolerated as long as unless they are quiet. And the cost of the ethical professionals who are watching. As a social worker, I can't ignore that what it does to that culture. Ethics codes do not exist in a vacuum. They rely on institutions not punishing those who follow them. So when a social worker reports misconduct, loses employment, reputation, or license stability, as a result, the lessons, it's learned quick. That when reporting is met with silence or retaliation instead of investigation, the profession absorbs the message. It becomes better and safer to look away. Don't report mandatorily. That's not a failure of an individual courage. It's failure of a system that punishes integrity. And once that lesson takes hold, harm compounds quietly and long before it becomes public. Veterans will notice the difference because they're trained to understand chains of command, but they also understand unlawful orders. We're trained to document, to escalate, to protect the integrity of the system precisely because of the damage that occurs when authority goes unchecked. So when a veteran participates lawfully and is retaliated against, it creates a unique fracture. It breaks the implicit promise that the service and civic duty are respected rather than exploited. I didn't expect special treatment. I expected lawful treatment. What I received instead was a demonstration of how quickly institutions will abandon their stated values when accountability becomes inconvenient. Veterans notice that. And when they do, participation drops. It's not tone, timing, style. They want to, if only it had been quieter, or slower, or cussed less, or more differential, or didn't argue so much, or only sided with us on, things we agreed with. And that argument collapses, though, under scrutiny. Because I was quiet at first. I was patient. I was differential. De-escalation didn't start immediately. It only happened when I got visible. It began when my actions produced the results. The tone isn't the distraction. Effectiveness is the trigger. Once participation starts changing outcomes, it becomes dangerous to those who benefit from the inertia. And that's when the systems move from avoidance to retaliation. Most people never get to see that consequence. They just see reporting and the restraint that preceded it. The asymmetry is part of how chilling effect persists. The cost is front loaded on the participant, while the benefit of silence is distributed amongst the institution. By laying this out end to end, I'm refusing to let that imbalance stand, and that's why I keep doing it anyway. At some point, the calculation changes. Once the retaliation has already happened, silence no longer protects you. At that point, documentation becomes just advocacy, but a record keeping for history. I will keep participating because withdrawal would validate the lesson that they tried to teach. And because the only thing more dangerous than retaliation is its success. It's not about winning, folks. It's about preventing normalization. The story stops with me. The system learns it worked. It understands this in full. The lesson changes, right? The real question is not whether what happened to me was extreme. The real question is how many people decided not to speak because it happened? How many of you decided not to speak up? That's the cost. That's why the story doesn't end here, folks. So I'm going to give you my final thought. I do want to remind you one more time. I'm not going to play the ad, but I am going to show you the picture. City council meeting tonight, first and third Monday. Be there, be square. Hope to see you guys there at 6:00. But why this matters more than any one person is that there's a point when every accountability story where the focus has to shift away from the individual fact and start the meaning, start towards leaning towards the meaning that it carries. That's the point. What happened to me matters not because I'm unique, but because I'm not. I didn't invent a new way to participate in government. I didn't exploit loopholes. I didn't weaponize outrage. I did what civic textbooks, ethics codes, military training, and public messaging tell us all to do. Documented concerns, asked questions, requested records, spoke at meetings. I ran for office. I reported misconduct through formal channels. I followed the law even when the law was being used to slow me down. And for that, I was treated as a problem to be neutralized. And that's the part that cannot be waved away as interpersonal conflict or tone policing or bureaucratic friction. When lawful participation produces consequences for the participant rather than the misconduct, the system has an inverted purpose. Government stops being a mechanism for accountability and becomes a mechanism for discipline. That matters because democracy does not fail all at once. It fails more quietly, incrementally, through lessons learned. The lesson taught here was simple and devastating. If you're effective, you're going to be punished. If you're persistent, your motives will be questioned. And if you insist on access, you're going to be reframed as disruptive. And if you report wrongdoing, your credibility will be attacked instead of the conduct itself that was bad being examined. That lesson does not stop with me. It radiates outward. Every resident who's watched this unfold learned something about the risks of participation with this government. And every professional who saw licensure threatened learned something about the price of ethics. Every disabled person saw access treated as inconvenience, learned something about how conditional their rights are. And every veteran watched authority close ranks, learned something about how fragile accountability is when power feels challenged. That's why it matters, even when you dislike me, even if you disagree with my style, even if you think you would have done it differently, or I shouldn't cuss, or whatever it is, or I shouldn't say that or this. The system doesn't check whether you're likable before it decides to retaliate. It checks whether or not you're effective. That's the most dangerous thing about what happens. Not that laws were bent or records were delayed. It's that the response was coordinated, normalized, and defended. And it involves silence where there should have been correction and speaking up, process where there should have been judgment, and legal language where there should have been some sort of accountability. And that's how the chilling effects are built, not with overt censorship, but with consequences that make people do the math and decide, is it safer to stay quiet? Do I gain? I'm a social worker. My professional duty is to see harm, name it, and intervene even when it's uncomfortable. I'm a veteran. My civic duty is to uphold the Constitution, not for the convenience of those in power. I'm a citizen. My duty is to participate, not to ask permission to be heard. Broadcasting without permission, when those duties are punished instead of protected, the failure is not personal, it's institutional, it's on them. The story matters because it draws a line in the sand. On one side, the version of civic life where participation is encouraged only as long as it's symbolic. And the other side, where there's a version where participation is respected even when it works. If you can't tell the difference, then the word transparency, accountability, and public service lose their meanings. I'm still here because silence would make that all of this and what they did acceptable. And it's so not. Anyway, guys, thanks for tuning in today. This has been Aaron Knapp. Appreciate you tuning in this midday afternoon podcast on accountability and why things matter. Hope to see you guys tonight, Monday night, at the city council meeting at 6 p.m. Please stop by, check out the meeting, let your opinions be known, or just simply be there to be heard. But check it out. I hope to see you there. Come say hi, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Remember, law enforcement, be lawful, not awful.